Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is the Sunday show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time TV program and discussion explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm. And my name is Natalia Humenyuk, and that's what we have prepared for you tonight. This week, for the first time since 2014, Ukraine and Russia held bilateral talks on the new gas transit agreement. We discuss the meaning of a potential contract. Ukrainian and Russian presidents are going to meet in Paris on December the 9th. Implementation of the Minsk agreement will be discussed. Oleksandr Hugue, former principal deputy of OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, explained why the time is not on the Ukrainian side. Thanks to the new laws, Ukraine's ruling Servant of the People party had earned up to 10 million euro during the elections. How will they build the party and what their ideology, kind of liberal socialism, means? Our exclusive with the head of the party, Oleksandr Korniyenko. In Georgian capital Tbilisi, riot police used water cannon on anti-government protests. Thousands demonstrate after broken promise by ex-prime minister and tycoon Ivanishvili to change the elections code. To what it leads? British author Peter Pomerantsev traveled around the world and explored how we may rethink the ways we fight disinformation and had given a lecture at Hromadske anniversary. This week in Vienna, for the first time since 2014, Ukraine and Russia held bilateral talks on the new gas transit agreement. The parties agreed to intensify negotiations, and both on bilaterally and trilaterally with the participation of the European Union. And here now we have a chance to explain what it all means, how to what it influence, and that would be helped with a great expert we have. This is Roman Nitsovich, who is research director of the think tank Dixie Group, and Oleksandr Kharchenko, who is director of the Energy Industry Research Center.
Good evening.
So Roman and Oleksandr, wherever who starts, please help us to navigate to our audience what, for instance, this talk means and what is on the table, what is exactly discussing. We know there would be that the agreement on gas is about to be ended. So,
you know, there is this track of trilateral talks with the EU Commission, Ukraine and Russia, where we negotiate two agreements. First is interconnection agreement between two transmission system operators, which is more a technical one. And second one is commercial agreement on gas transmission, which is like transit deal. So, and this bilateral meeting in Vienna, as was explained by Ukrainian officials, was a part of this trilateral process. But now I think the Ukrainian party is trying to use all possible channels of communication, even bilateral ones, to reach the deal.
Just give me 2 words, because it's important to explain, first of all, that it's a long story. And long story started in 2009, when it was signed our current agreement. And trouble...
By Yulia Tymoshenko, that exactly agreement.
Yeah. Okay, by Yulia Tymoshenko, but we are talking about a little bit other issue. It was old Soviet-style agreement. Like Ukraine as a state and Naftogaz as a state-owned company with state Russia agree something. But the main issue from Ukrainian side right now, it's, guys, we want to be a part of Europe. We have free trade agreement, and we are part of energy community. That we want to work with Russia on base of European rules, not on base of Russian rules. Russia still want to have own rules. Not just in case with Ukraine, it's also about Nord Stream 2 and many other exemptions in Europe. But in general, Russian position is, like was 3 months ago, full Russian position could be explained as a word, Ukraine is our province and we still want to work with them in our manner. But Ukrainian side is strong enough to say, guys, no way. We want to be part of European process. Euro Commission help us and support us. And the basic of any stepped progress from Ukrainian position is, as Roman mentioned, interconnection agreement. It's a technical thing, but extremely important thing. Why? This 10 years of old contract, in real life, we not owned our gas transportation system at all. It's Gazprom who manage it in real life. We have no any information which gas we transport for whom. We never know. We're just a tool in this case. But by European rules, we will know everything. Which gas, which volume, which time we transport to whom in Europe. And it's a principal point, because in this situation, what we could do, we could go to ENGIE and say, guys, we have free capacity on our pipe. We have interconnection agreement with Gazprom. Just order this gas through Ukraine. We don't have to do all the transportation for Gazprom. We could work with European companies. And this is a key and basic stone for all Ukrainian position in these negotiations.
How the unbundling of Naftogaz and this creation of a new company to which the state transfers Ukraine's gas transport system from Naftogaz, from the how it's can you explain what's happening with that?
Actually, the current transit contract was signed with Naftogaz as vertically integrated company.
Yeah.
Now we will have unbundled and fully independent transmission system operator.
That happened this autumn.
That is happening now,
Okay.
and the full end of the story of unbundling will be on January 1st, when this company will be legally separated from Naftogaz. And it's exactly this company which applied for certification. This company is actually running negotiations with Gazprom, and this company will be the one who will be party to the agreements.
It's not Naftogaz. It's very important now to understand that it will be not a Naftogaz. It will be its name's OGTSU.
What Ukrainians and I guess Europeans and now international partners are worried because there hadn't been no direct buying gas from Gazprom for 4 years, since November 2015, as we remember. But do you think there is, I know you are not the political analysts, you're experts on what you are experts, but there are the concern that Ukraine may not really, somehow isn't fully independent from Gazprom.
Could I clarify a little bit?
Yes,
it's not we buy, it's Gazprom not sell. I just want to remind you that as a result of Sukhoi arbitration between Naftogaz and Gazprom, arbiters said, guys, in frame of this contract, Naftogaz has to buy 5 billion cubic meters per year from Gazprom. Then Naftogaz sent to Gazprom money to buy first part. If I write, it's like $120 million, and order some gas. It was spring 2018, quite cold time. And 1 hour before the gas have to start to pump, Gazprom said, no, we will not sell you any gas. We send you money back. And maybe you remember it was pre-Krutty action and huge PR campaign just to save gas for our European friends, not to create some disaster with gas supply. And as a result, Gazprom not ready to sell, first of all. It's one very important part of this game. Why? Because if Gazprom sells something in line with Stockholm Court arbitration, it means that they are okay with this solution of the court. And it's not appropriate for them, first of all. Because theoretically, Ukraine has industrial gas market. We have like 50, 70 real gas traders who operate on this market. And Ukraine as a state never forbid someone to go to this market and to sell gas, including Gazprom. But Gazprom has two trouble. One trouble with Naftogaz, they don't like to sell directly to Naftogaz because of the Stockholm Court arbitration. And another trouble they have with our anti-monopoly committee, because anti-monopoly committee of Ukraine make a penalty for Gazprom. It's a $6 billion, and Gazprom still pay nothing, and they have to solve before they will start any operation in Ukraine. And it's law, it's technical, it's not political. They have to solve this issue.
Yeah. But nothing prevents Gazprom from selling gas to any of Ukrainian traders.
Any of independent traders,
yes,
it's open market. We are in line in European rules.
It is very Russian story, to offer some kind of package deal. Either it is a political deal, which is maybe could be reached in next Normandy talks around, or it is like not only transit deal, but also gas supply deal.
You mentioned the very important things, because what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that according to the CEO of Naftogaz, Yuri Vitrenko, the deadline for the conclusion of the long-term agreement expires on December 13th.
Yes and no.
Okay. Explain, please, again.
It's a technical thing. If Gazprom want to pump gas from 1st January and 9 a.m. 1st January, this current contract is expired. From this moment, to pump something through Ukraine, Gazprom has to send to us order to pump next gas after 9 a.m. And our regulator, national regulator of Ukraine, has to has to prepare and approve tariffs for this pumping. It means Gazprom have to send something like, we will pump like 10 billion cubic meters for 2 years. And we want to have a tariff, how many we have to pay for this volume. If they will not send in time before 13 December, Yuri, absolutely right, it just means they can't pump from 1st January, but maybe from 2nd or 10 or 12 or from 1st February or from 1st March.
Yes, actually this week our regulatory authority published the tariffs for the new TSO, transmission system operator.
OGTSU, yeah.
And it does not include those interconnection points with Russia, only those interconnection points with Western states where we import gas and can export gas.
With Europeans.
Well. Yes.
So let people also, because of course many people are really extremely concerned prior to the meeting between the presidents, Russian and Ukrainian, which will happen in a week, and now it's fully confirmed. So what could they discuss? Could anything be changed? You know, what also the experts on the energy, know about the possible, because it's not just people maybe understand what's going on with the Minsk agreement, but they totally those, apart from those who are very, very much focused, don't understand what is exactly now might be discussed on this level.
I mean, everyone is aware that decisions in Russian gas policy are not taken by Gazprom's CEO, in CEO cabinet, in his office, but in Kremlin. So talking to Putin maybe provides some impetus to this negotiation process. But we need to be very careful about any political packages and any political deals. Because previously those political deals associated with gas is a transit or supply of gas were at very high cost for Ukraine.
Can you explain the best and the worst scenario for Ukraine? What could be the good position for Ukraine, and what, for instance, is needed? Maybe not the super best, not ideal. We can't expect anything ideal at this page dealing with Russia, but something which would be good, and something, what kind of both of you, what kind of a risk?
Something that could be bad, that's Roman 100% right, it's a political decision. I believe it will be no any political solution. Why? The first issue which Russians want to try to solve in political manner, it's at $3 billion that they have to pay to Naftogaz by Stockholm arbitration and $6 billion from anti-monopoly committee. It's a two-part of discussion. And any discussion in Vienna, in Brussels, everywhere, started from Russian saying, before we will solve this issue, we are not ready to talk about everything. Okay, guys, but the question is that Stockholm arbitration, it's not a political court. It's an extremely commercial issue. Extremely, it's just a commercial court. And this court is a milestone basic for all relations in commercial big business solution in Europe at all. It's not just for Ukraine, it's not just for Russia, it's not just for Germany, for everyone. Everyone say, yes, if Stockholm arbitration decides something, we are in line with the decision. And if Russia will open a window to change Stockholm arbitration results through the political blackmailing and political any kind of discussion, it will open a box of Pandora in real life. It's not just for Ukraine, it's for Bulgaria, it's for Czechia, it's for many other countries. Because in this case, you have no any rights in commercial deal. You have to act in gas industry just with Russian's empire, nothing else.
What I understand that NATO has also announced that it's ready to receive the victory of arbitration, this $3 billion with the gas instead of money. Yet, still, I would say, so what is the Ukrainian negotiating position? You know, what, as you would look at the results of the negotiation
Well,
and would say,
the
like,
position is quite clear. So we need a long-term contract for gas transit with both capacity, flexible capacity, and also guaranteed capacity. So guaranteed is 100% sure we get this gas through the system. Flexible, it depends on consumption in Europe, on the demand. And second position, it should be under European rules. So those two types of agreements, as we said, interconnection agreement and actually the contract for transportation. These are key positions. Now we need to understand what are possible ways of reaching some kind of compromise. The Russians say, drop all your legal claims, which is, I think, impossible. We can drop only those claims which are currently in the arbitration with no hearing started, because there is one arbitration with decision made and still somehow contested by
others,
Gazprom.
Yes. Two others still in progress.
And there are two other claims, and the current arbitration claim on gas transit issue still can be, the parties can refuse and stop this arbitration before it starts. Another possible concession or possible deal may be the duration of the contract, as it currently, being said, not 10 years, but maybe shorter. But again, this is, there are certain red lines which we do not need to cross. As I said, no political deal, only commercial one. And second, no deviation from European rules.
How it look in real life? What would Russia try to do? They want to have 1-year contract. They want to finish Nord Stream 2 and just bypass Ukraine for 100%. Another part of this game is Germany. Germany internally has huge discussion right now. It's really so, because from one side it's like a fixed position that Germany support Nord Stream 2. But from other side, many common sense guys in German government included say, guys, if we will have Nord Stream 2 and we will not operate, and same time we will have not operational Ukrainian GTS, it means that level of energy security for Europe moves down extremely. Because any problem with one of Nord Stream created like no chance to bypass problem or disaster in Nord Stream 2. You just have no other way to pump gas, and any winter it could create a huge trouble.
I just want that before you even ended that our director show the map of the supply of Russian gas to Europe while you.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah, but you can follow,
Yeah, but next, next, what I want to say, the solution today is not in Europe. Solution today is in US. US Senate still in progress with sanction bill against Nord Stream 2, against technology to install in deep sea pipeline Nord Stream 2. If Senate will vote to this bill, if this sanction came to action, it means that Russia has no technological way to finish Nord Stream 2 for next at minimum 3 years. It's a minimal term. And it means for us that we have a strong and huge position for next step for negotiations. If this bill will be not voted, it means for Russians that they have more power, they have more way to blackmail Ukraine, they have more way to push Europe, and in this case, of course, our position is not so strong.
Another barrier to Nord Stream 2 is actually enforcement of European legislation, because according to it, no one has to, book whole capacity of this pipeline. And we've seen this with EU court decision on Opal. Opal is a pipeline in Germany, which is onshore continuation of the first Nord Stream. And it said that Gazprom has no right to book over 50% of this pipeline. This means he cannot use the whole capacity of first Nord Stream. And this allows Ukraine to use its system to more capacity. So if it happens to Nord Stream 2 as well, And we very much hope that German regulator will also apply European legislation, not to avoid some derogations, because otherwise he will face, some legal issues from European Commission and from Ukraine as well. So that European legislation will be fully enforced not only here in Ukraine, but also in Europe as well. That's what means solidarity.
So I want also our audience, if you want to know more, you can also read the article on our webpage, en.hromadske.ua. This is the article which is named Gas War, Will Ukraine and Russia Agree on Transit? You can also have it on the, as if you're now following it on Twitter, to have the link. So there you can have more details. But to finalize our discussion, both Roman and Oleksandr, again, though our audience is quite aware of what's going on, many people are proud, are happy that Ukraine is maintaining the independence from Russian oil and gas. And earlier, the leadership of the Naftogaz many times said that they want to have it like Ukraine be fully independent, even like by 2020. To what extent Ukraine is really dependent? How much Ukraine is really dependent? And to what extent this independence could be reached if we speak about the full independence?
Look, we are offering services of gas transport. Currently, it's only Gazprom which uses the services for transporting of gas from east to west. Now, as we say, if we apply European legislation, if we sign with Gazprom all these agreements, we will open our market to maybe some new companies. And if Russia does not change its behavior, Gazprom will be fined again for his monopolism.
For me, real independence, it means that we produce enough gas to supply ourselves and don't have connection to import of gas. Now we have import like 10, 12 billion cubic meters per year. It means we have to produce more and we have to consume less. Energy efficiency, transforming from gas to biomass, and same time we have to produce more. And then in 5-7 years we could be independent.
So thanks a lot for the explanation. It's more clear for me, but I'm sure for our audience as well. That was Roman Nitsovich, who is a research director from the think tank Dixie Group, and Oleksandr Kharchenko, who is a director from Energy Industry Research Center. And of course, we are looking forward also for that meeting, which will happen in a week on the 9th of December. That would be the meeting in the Normandy Forum. It's confirmed now by Elisa Palace. There would be also the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the French President Macron. Yet we understand that the biggest, that would be really discussed in the next show, but already now we can go into the details. We know that the implementation of the Minsk agreement would be something which would be really discussed, and we had a chance earlier to talk to the former deputy, principal deputy of the chief monitor of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, Oleksandr Hugue, who actually claims that the times is not on the Ukrainian side, and explain the details on why any other agreement won't be much different. The Minsk agreement is something which was always in the air, which was on the table for the last years. But of course, after the change of the new government here and after this agreement to the Steinmeier formula, it really got into the larger public. What would be your assessment of that agreement at this point of history?
What is certainly safe to say is that these agreements have helped to contain the conflict to where it is now. Now, technically, in any armed conflict, any armed violence need to be dealt with in similar ways. You need to stop the fighting, which translates into a non-use of weapon, as it is written in the agreements, or a ceasefire by translation. You would need to make sure that the sites are not too close, because that leads unavoidably to fighting. Translated into the Minsk language, this is disengagement. You need to ensure that the weapons that reach over long distances are being pulled away to a distance where they can't reach their aim any longer, and that is, in Minsk language, the withdrawal of heavy weapons. You need to ensure the safety and security of the civilians That means you need to demine. Also, that has found its way into the Minsk agreement. So now, whether these items are agreed in Minsk or elsewhere, they will be the same to deal with any armed violence of similar nature. Now, this, of course, leaves away the political will that is needed to implement these measures, but looking at the technical side of things, these items will be necessary in order to stop the armed violence. Once again, it is difficult to prove that they had an effect because, obviously, and the fact is that the violence continues. If pulling back to where the situation was before the conflict started, if that would be easy, then we would not sit here together. So everyone has to acknowledge that the task ahead, especially after so many years, will not be an easy task. That is the first very important fact to acknowledge. It will be very difficult, and it will take difficult decisions to make sure that these technical measures to end the fighting and to stop the bloodshed will be implemented. So that, at first, is very key and important to understand. I would argue that because this war doesn't divide people that have been divided by history, by language or ethnicity, the conflict itself is the dividing factor. And the longer this fighting lasts, the longer there is a contact line, the more risky it becomes that the Ukrainians on the non-government controlled side divide themselves from the Ukrainians on the government controlled side and vice versa. And the wider this gap gets, the more difficult it will become to bring it back together. The more urgently, therefore, it is to make sure that the gap doesn't become bigger. One important measure, of course, is to try to stop the fighting, because that is a key problem in this equation. The more death, the more tragedy, the more destruction, the bigger that gap becomes. But also other measures in terms of how Ukrainians in non-government controlled areas are being perceived in areas controlled by the government, and how they themselves perceive how they're welcome is of high relevance, because that will also give them the feeling as to how they will be welcomed across that gap. Therefore, once again, I do think time is not on the side of Ukrainians on both sides of the line, all over Ukraine. The lives of people that use these connections on the road, on the rail, on the plane, to go to work, to see their relatives, to do business, or simply travel for pleasure, is now interrupted and has been interrupted now for many years. And this interruption, of course, has impact on their lives. One obvious impact is the security when they still do cross, and many in the thousands every day still do cross this line, which is a very important figure to consider, risk their lives when they do so. And as you know, people do still die when they do cross the line, be it out of exhaustion, of the long waiting hours exposed to the elements, or because of the security risks that they still face in these areas. But the line, that contact line and the continued fighting also causes other security risks. It causes risks of damage to the property these people live in. It causes damage to infrastructure that these civilians depend on both sides of the contact line: water, electricity, gas, just to mention a few. It has impacts further on terms of their psychology, because that continued fighting every day, non-stop. Their lives in non-government controlled areas and their lives in government controlled areas have taken different courses in these many years. They listen to different news. They have been educated to different curriculums. They pay with different currencies. They drive cars with different number plates. They follow different cultural events on either side of the contact line. And that now, for many years, that creates different lives on these two sides of the contact line.
You can read and watch the full version of this interview on our webpage en.hromadske.ua, while we follow the different topic. Thanks to the new election laws, the ruling party, the Servant of the People, had managed to earn 8 million euros, almost 8 million euros. This is the cash back, but as well the money given by the state after their success during the elections, while the party has just 500 members. We managed to talk. My colleague Maxim Kamenev had talked to the new leader of the Servant of the People Party, Oleksandr Korniyenko, who in fact explained what they're going to do with this money, what is also the ideology of their party, which they claim to be human-centric and kind of something in between of liberalism and socialism. We also asked him about the new how the law on so-called law on the occupied territories could be changed, but also we discussed the scandals in the party, which Oleksandr Korniyenko doesn't consider as a crisis. Please watch.
Can you name the main sponsors of the Servant of the People Party now?
We have a number of companies. They are in the report. There are a lot of them. I won't list them now. They are primarily sponsors from our election campaign. We have some money remaining. We spent some on Truskovets, and accordingly, we still have a part left for our current activities. But it is clear that from January 1st, we will receive state funding. Thus, the state will become the main sponsor, because the amount of funding we get.
How much will you receive?
We get two sums. One is the so-called cashback for the election campaign. It is being paid since this year. That's about 114 million hryvnias, or $4.8 million, what we spent on the election. And the second amount is state funding. Of the total amount of 260 million hryvnias, or $10.8 million, our share is 43 million, or $1.8 million. This is what we have earned. That's about 80 to 90 million hryvnias, $3.3 to $3.8 million, and 20 million hryvnias a quarter, or $832,600, respectively.
What will you do with this cash back? Will you give it back to people who invested in the party? Will you invest in its development?
No, it is impossible to return them. Unfortunately or fortunately, we will invest it. We have many tasks related both to our current activities and to the development of the structure and to the development of the centers that we have promised and set out to do. In reality, all this does not require fantastic sums of money. But when you start to count, there are 100,000 hryvnias there, it's 20,000 there, so little by little.
$200 million is good money.
Yes, and we are aware that once again installing billboards, distributing newspapers would be a little wrong. Most of the money will be spent on the creation of additional intellectual value. For example, the Center of Strategies and Decision-Making. We have such an initiative. It'll actually work as a hub for the accumulation of statistics, information from various think tanks, and in January, we will announce a tender for several positions, sociological research, analytics, and more.
What is the main purpose of the Servant of the People Party? What is it?
The main purpose of the Servant of the People Party is the implementation of our political program.
Formulate for our viewers who have not perused the program what the main 2-3 theses of the Servant of the People program are.
The person is in the center. For example, human centricity.
What is it? I do not understand.
This is, in a good sense, both economic and non-economic liberalism. That is, when a person is the focus of the state.
Can you now briefly and clearly explain to me what President Zelensky's plan for the Donbass is? You said that he repeatedly stated to the MPs, to the government, to international diplomats. That means you know it and can present it clearly.
To continue the diplomatic policy of resolving the situation through the Normandy and Minsk formats. That's how it sounds right now. The president has already voiced the issues that will be addressed at the forthcoming Normandy format summit. This is an exchange, a further separation of forces, a revision of the attitude to ceasefire, and the introduction of certain sanctions, as far as I understand the president. If you violate it, you should be held accountable for it. It is also possible that elections in the occupied territories will be further discussed, but after gaining control of the border, as has always been said. In principle, there is nothing fundamentally new here. This is a political and diplomatic path under the Minsk agreements, in the manner in which they correspond to the national interests of Ukraine.
There are too many scandals. I don't want to spend all of my interview time or much of it. I will just briefly list them. The story of the lie detector between Arahami and Dubinsky, Mr. Yaramenko's correspondence, Roman Ivanisov's conviction for statutory rape, telegram pranking story. It turns out that even your 250 people cannot be united by economic and peace topics. They are at each other's throats, getting into arguments. However, there is no one in your party who can replace you at the head. Why is this happening? I'm not gloating. I want to understand. If these people can't agree on the conditions that everybody has agreed upon, freedom, fairness and economic growth, so why are they behaving like this in the parliament?
Everybody makes mistakes, including our MPs. We made mistakes when we selected them to a certain extent. Speaking of statistics, these aforementioned scandals regard 5 lawmakers tops, which is 1 out of 50 or 2%.
In order to do these kind of interviews and explain what's going on in the country in objective and unbiased way, we also need your support. We're existing as a project in English for 5 years, so we encourage you to donate, and I'll remind you what we are doing.
I would like us to be heard, not only in Ukraine, but all over the world.
No bread for 3 months.
Not one, but look how many. There's bread here and there.
You are going against the God.
Of course, point number 1.
Thanks for the invitation.
When will this all end?
The number of political prisoners has grown.
Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. For more than 2 weeks, Georgians in the capital Tbilisi gather in front of the parliament to protest failed promises to change the electoral code by former Prime Minister and tycoon Bidzina Ivanishvili. Also, for a few times, including this week, police used water cannon to disperse the protesters and later built the fence around the parliament building. Before we calling to Tbilisi and trying to explain what's going on and providing you what it all leads, we also want to show you this background video produced by our partners and colleagues JAMnews from Tbilisi.
საპარლამენტო დემოკრატიის პირობებში არჩევნების პროპორციული სისტემა უკეთ პასუხობს ხელისუფლებაში მრავალპარტიული და შესაბამისად პლურალისტური პოლიტიკური წარმომადგენლობის ევროპულ სტანდარტს.
Delegates, it is an honor to address you today as the President of Georgia.
As ერთი დეპუტატი მომხრე და 3 წინააღმდეგი. Quorum იყო 113. ეს ხმები არ არის საკმარისი გადაწყვეტილების მისაღებად.
And Margarita Akhvlediani, who is the editor-in-chief of the JAMnews, Georgian Tbilisi-based news organization, is with us. Good evening, Margarita.
Good evening.
So please,
thank you for inviting to talk to you.
Yeah, great. And look, we just looked at what was the reasons for the protest, but let us know what's happening now in Tbilisi and in the country, and to what it all leads, what should be discussed and decided.
Now it's time for negotiations mainly, though people are still in the street, not so many, maybe up to 100 in front of the parliament, and there were some rallies in the streets in Kutaisi, in another main city in Georgia today during the day. But mainly it is a time for negotiations. There were several rounds already of negotiations of the united opposition with the ruling party, but they can't agree, and the situation is kind of not adequate, because now they're discussing not the very particular requirements by opposition, that there will be only proportional models, what was from the beginning, proportional model of parliamentary elections, and the election must be conducted right now, not in next year. But now the discussion is over much softer offer. It's about so-called German model, which offers actually no amendments to the constitution. At least the opposition claim, and mainly the experts in the country, they claim that no amendments to the constitution are required. But a ruling party doesn't agree even to this. And so it's kind of, the situation is strange, and it's difficult to say. Even right now, they are finishing the discussion between them, all the leaders of the opposition, of the united opposition, what to do next. So they offer to involve European experts in the dispute and to decide. And there was an idea that if the Nation Commission, for instance, would say that we agree, no constitutional amendments are needed, then ruling parties should agree. And if the constitutional amendments needed, opposition would agree. But ruling party doesn't agree to anything, and it is a problem now.
So it looks like an obvious political crisis, but how it impacts the daily life in Georgia, to what it also, what I understand, may lead apart from the fact we don't know whether these snap elections will take place. You know, apart from this discussion, you know, how big you can compare this protest to any others in Georgia, and how you think the opposition strong? Do you think that the opposition, in case of the election, can, you know, come to power?
I don't think so, that it can happen right now, because it's not about actually revolution in the country. It's mainly about changes to the electoral system, and the new parliament will be elected based on the new system, and then the changes would come. So it's maybe for the first time during the last years in Georgia, it's not about revolution, not about coup, but mainly about discussion. And so I don't think that it is possible now that the revolution would happen, because there is also like big divide between the different parts of the population. Because while you probably know the slogan is all of us, we are against one. When one is our oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili, the head of the ruling party. But actually the population, while they mainly are against this oligarch, the population also doesn't support the national movement, so the opposition leading party, which now leads the protest. And it is why so many people would support the changes into the electoral law, but they don't support actually what exactly is happening now in front of the parliament. Maybe it sounds a bit complicated, but not only the position is kind of divided, but people are divided. The population is divided.
At the same time, we also mentioned there would be the police used water cannons against demonstrants, and now you're speaking that the most of the demands from the opposition party, not from the protesters, are about the election code, about all the things about the constitutional amendments, very political things. But so. Does the general public, does the tactics of the police had changed? Are you concerned of any, major case when, for instance, the police would also disperse those who currently are under before the parliament, or there are not that high level of the emotions at the moment any longer?
It depends what I should compare with, because in summer we survived just absolutely violent dispersal of the protest, and it was up to 20-30,000 people were in the streets, and they were dispersed, and many were injured, and some lost their eyes and something. So because rubber bullets were used, and if I compare with that disperse, then of course now police has learned its lesson definitely. So it was dispersal, but it was kind of, let's say, polite dispersal of protesters, if I can say so. So now the situation is not so violent as it was in summer. Everybody learned their lessons. Opposition leaders also, and those who participate in the activists in the protest, they also learned their lessons. They are not so aggressive. They are not trying to enter the parliament. They just picket it. They just stay there and block the entrances to the parliament. So it's difficult to say what will happen, because now it's deadlock. It's really deadlock, and everything is about political issues, because no real demands about the government should go or something. So it's about changes to the electoral codes. And it maybe even sounds to some of my friends, for instance, beyond Germany, it sounds even funny, because ordinary people, just people who never heard probably about electoral law or about the German model or something, now they're staying in front of the parliament and demanding it. But really, it's like political education has come to Georgia just immediately in a couple of weeks. And everybody now understands what is German model, why we need it.
Feels like Okay, so Margarita, thanks a lot for your explanation. I'm very sure it's very helpful to those who want to understand what's going on in Georgia. So follow also JAMnews, their Twitter and as well our publications, and we are moving forward. As we can speak that disinformation, propaganda, and the fake news, they are some of the biggest topics of today. British author Peter Pomerantsev had published the new book, This Is Not Propaganda, Adventures in the War Against Reality, dives deep into the propaganda, looking at the techniques which are used across the world. This week, Peter Pomerantsev have come here to Ukraine, to Kyiv, in order to give the lecture at the Hromadske anniversary on the way we should rethink the freedom of speech and propaganda. We had sat down early before that with Peter Pomerantsev and also looked at how far-right, ISIS, and modern populist movements, what common threads they have. But as well, it's interesting that Peters argues that instead of thinking about the information as the weapon, it's important to create the platforms for constructive discussion. So please watch this part of interview, but the full version is available on our web page and our social media.
So in the Philippines, they would tell me that at least it's not as bad here as Russia and Ukraine. And they saw, they actually, in terms of trying to understand what's happening in the Philippines, they looked at Russia and Ukraine a lot, actually, to try to make sense of what was going on there. So I think everybody sees not just, that hell is somewhere else. But what was interesting in the book was trying to understand whether the phenomena that I'd seen in Russia, whether they were similar across the world. And they are. I mean, it's surprising how similar the propaganda crisis or the crisis in dealing with propaganda is everywhere. And Russia was one of the first places to figure this out for reasons that I explore in the book. But really, there's 3 or 4 key kind of themes. One of them is technical, which is that nowadays censorship doesn't happen through trying to squeeze information, but by overloading people with so much disinformation and bots and trolls and fake news that they can't see truth from fiction anymore, and they can't talk to each other, and they can't trust each other. And the really important thing about that is that the excuse to do that sort of propaganda through noise, is freedom of expression. I've heard this over and over and over from propagandists across the world. This is just freedom of expression. And even when it's used to harass or bully or intimidate or alienate critics or dissidents or journalists, they don't really have an argument against it, because the argument of pro-democracy activists has always been we need more freedom of expression. And here the regime goes, what can we do? You can't prove that it's the government behind these campaigns most of the time. These are just concerned citizens who don't agree with your position. And so Russia was quite an innovator in that sense. But no, I think on an even deeper level, a propaganda that is not based on ideological principles and not trying to convince people of anything, but just trying to confuse them, sow cynicism. That was something that was sort of pioneered in Russia to a huge amount in the 90s and early 2000s, which was what my first book was about, this kind of sense that nothing is true and sort of wild relativism. Russia was probably the first one to co-opt that approach. And also this kind of attitude where the facts don't matter, that we see so much in Trump today or in Duterte. That's something that we saw in Russia already in the early 90s with Zhirinovsky, in many ways as a prototype for all these politicians. And I talked to lawyers in Washington, like, why didn't you put sanctions on people who work at the troll factory? They're like, we can't sanction people for freedom of speech. What they could do is get them for using false documents, like little legal problems, opening fake bank accounts, which they've done in America. You could get them for that, but you couldn't really get them on freedom of speech issues. So that was, there isn't even kind of a regulatory framework to approach these things. I mean, the challenge in Ukraine, as everybody here knows, is that there's sort of a Russian propaganda that comes from the Kremlin through Russian TV channels and through social media. I mean, that's partly been dealt with due to, harsh, but I think probably justified bans on Russian media. But then you just have a lot of powerful oligarchs in the country who might as well be, proxies of the Kremlin. So that's what makes the situation here so hard. And, that's something that's a systemic problem, which I don't quite understand how that's going to be dealt with. But what this last election has shown is that actually it is possible to break through the polarization in the country that the Kremlin tried to take advantage of, and that politicians here have tried to take advantage of, which is sort of splitting the country into 2. There are ways around that. There are ways to find commonalities between different groups of people. How deep those commonalities go, we have to explore. And I don't think political campaigns are going to be the ones that do this in the most socially beneficial way. And that's up to media and public service broadcasting to do. But it was refreshing. I mean, it showed that a lot of these kind of crude divisions that we draw around Ukraine, they weren't necessarily true. Regulation is coming to the information space. There's a way of making that regulation democratic, though. I think the regulation has to be not about censoring content, but about opening up the information space so we understand how the information environment around us is created. That means opening up the algorithms, so companies have to do reports that show why people see certain bits of information, not other bits of information. That means understanding anything that you see online, why you see it, who's behind it, whether it's organic or amplified, whether it's a bot or a real person, so that we can start to communicate with the information environment around us as equals. Yeah? And the dictators will hate that.
So the full version you can watch at our webpage, but also sign up for our YouTube channel, the Hromadske International as well. Search Hromadske International on Facebook and Twitter. We are there 24/7. You can also listen to our program on the SoundCloud. Beware of that the next time if you watch this one. And I want to thank you from the entire team of Hromadske International and see you next week.